I guess we can go ahead and get started. It's 7:06. We got a lot to cover tonight. Because these two words they're related to one another, but they're also they're very dense words when you talk about what they mean and their application. So I don't really know how to start other than just what did you guys find?
I think my conception of the word soul was like way off in left field compared to what it is. I mean that was
the video that we perceive it as being something not physical, just like
like a spirit or your whatever. And it's like when they were talking about it, it's just like your whole body, your throat or whatever. And it's like, whoa, I was like way off in left field compared to that.
Yeah, and that's, Joseph and I were talking about this ahead of time. That word is the one that I was most excited for us to talk about, because I think that's so typical in Western culture in general. We got that from the Greek philosophers. We just tend to think of it in that way. So when you say the word soul, we automatically think the immaterial part of us. So yeah, that's not, you're definitely not alone in having that concept of the soul, for sure.
Yeah, it just makes, it's like,
yeah.
That's what we're always taught, that the soul leaves your body when you die. So that's like,
I wish they would, I mean, now it's so well established in the Bible translations that I get why they use it. But I almost feel like it would be good to not use that word as a translation for Nephesh, because it just has so much baggage with it now, we're going to automatically assume that it means something that it doesn't actually mean.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, the heart thing, it was interesting, them not having a word for a brain.
Yeah.
It's like, that's reassuring. But but it makes sense though. It's like when you put your heart into something, to me it's like, okay, you put your heart into something, that could also mean your soul, where it's your whole body, you put your whole body into something. But to have just the different uses of the word heart also was very interesting on how it's broken down, like the physical, the thoughts, the different meanings of the word heart, but in having it connected more toward, well, it's really your brain, what you're thinking about. And garbage in, garbage out is the old computer programming stuff.
Yeah.
I've always been told that we're, some people believe that we are like a trichotomy, and some people believe we're a dichotomy. So I've always gone with the trichotomy thing, because the Bible says that the word of God is able to divide or discern between the soul and the spirit. So I've always been taught we have a body, we have a soul, and we have a spirit. And the spirit is the immaterial part of us. And the soul is like the intellect, emotion, and will, which is really more, when I was studying these words, that's really more what you get when you go through, excuse me, all the verses about the heart. You can just see it. There's just so many different uses, the context, just a lot of different emotions, like your heart is discouraged, grieved, in awe. And then there's other contexts where it's more pertaining to the will, like when it talks about being obstinate or hard. And then there's some that talk about thoughts, like forgetting and considering and hiding words in your heart and stuff like that. So So anyway, it was different than kind of the way I've learned it. And so it seems like the way we divide it, like in the churches that I've gone to, seems like if you're going to believe in a trichotomy, it would be more like body, soul, heart, and then spirit. So I don't know, but then, like you said, Bible Project talks about Nephesh as being more like the physical. Did I get that right? I mean, did I understand that correctly from Bible Project?
Yeah. Yes. I fell down a couple of rabbit holes, and I could talk about that later. But I think in general, that is probably it would be correct that that's the main way that an ancient Israelite would have understood that word. I don't think body gets you there when you're talking about Nephesh, just to say that it equals body.
Right.
Yeah, like your person, or the idea of life. I kept seeing life over and over again. Like Nephesh is translated the living thing over and over and over and over and over again. And that was one of the interesting passages that caused me to fall down one of my rabbit holes. But I again, I can talk about that later. But it's yeah, I think you're on the right track there. It is the living being, but it's the body, but it's more than that. It feels like it's like who you are, your essence. It very much understood the physical to be part of that essence. I feel like I'm still saying it wrong. Like, it's just so hard. This is not the way that we were taught these things.
Right.
I had to write a paper when I was in seminary about trichotomy versus dichotomy, and being the rebel that I was, I didn't choose either. After I had done some studying on it, I decided unity, conditional unity is what I decided on, which means that we are one thing. And if we are ever separate, as in terms of material and immaterial, that is an unideal state to be in. And so we're going to want to be back together, if that makes sense. And so, like, sorry, I don't want to. I need to shut up soon so that you guys can talk.
No, keep going. It's fine.
This is just interesting.
No, you can't leave us hanging now on this.
Okay. All right. So it's going to surprise you, I think, when you look at the New Testament, if you really look at how many times it talks about us being away from our body. There's a couple of times that Paul talks about it. And I think there's one time in Revelation where it gets talked about. And that's really about it. The rest of the time, it's about resurrection. Like, resurrection is talked about over and over and over and over again. And so, in other words, I don't think we were ever meant to be separate from our bodies. That is a non-ideal state that we may have to be in for a little while we're waiting for resurrection. But that was a Greek idea. The idea that the body dies and the soul goes to some ideal place, and that's the part of you that mattered anyway, was the immaterial part of you that floats off wherever it floats off. Very Greek idea. If you're talking about Jewish ideas, their idea was always, no, we get, when they finally did develop a concept of the afterlife, the idea was, this is a bodily resurrection. God is going to raise us, because I really think the Israelites thought of themselves as one thing, not a bunch of different pieces of things. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So anyway, I chose conditional unity because I liked choosing something that wasn't part of the assignment, because that's always fun. So anyway, it just brought me back when you used the word dichotomy or trichotomy.
So was he always one of the kids that was unable to follow directions on every report card?
Oh, no.
I didn't get that way until I got to seminary, honestly. Like, then I was like, I'm not following the parameters of this assignment. Sorry, like I said, I'll shut up. What else?
No, no, that's interesting.
Now you really
Christina,
have me
you-
thinking about like the resurrection body and what that looks like. Because I'm like, okay, this body's either gonna rot in the ground or be cremated. So then what happens?
Right.
Like, do I have to have it
We get a
back?
new body.
I hope so. I don't want that one back, that's for sure. I have always wondered about that, like the church's stance on cremation, and I don't know what it would be. I should ask a pastor someday.
Yeah, I don't know what I don't know what a crossing pastor would say if you asked them about cremation. They've probably been asked that question before.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it was the Catholic. It was like at first they didn't allow the cremation because you
I
know
think
that-
this came up at explorations, but I don't remember. I don't think they were against it.
Huh.
don't-
It was making me think about that when you talked about like we were never really meant to be apart from the body. So I don't know, it's just kind of an interesting,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because I think, yeah, it's such a common concept to think of the soul as like this part that, yeah, like floats off when you die. And maybe that's not really how that works. I mean, I think I like to believe that that's how it works, because I want to believe that if I died tonight or tomorrow, I would get to be with Jesus like immediately. I wouldn't have to wait.
Mhm.
Well,
I
and
don't know that.
I think, you know, I don't want to, you know, say something wrong here. I'm pretty sure that Paul does say, he's pretty clear, if you died today, you would be with God.
Jesus says it to the thief on the cross.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I guess my point is, even though that is going to happen, I think where you get into trouble is if you start thinking that's the ideal. Because I mean, you hear this all the time, like, well, when I die and go to heaven, and I'm like, well, I don't want to die and go to heaven. I mean, I guess to some extent, maybe, but I would rather Jesus come back and I just get my new body, right? I mean, if I die and go to heaven, great. You know, Paul says that's better. So it's going to be better than whatever we're experiencing here, because we'll be with God. But that's still not the end goal. The end goal is to have a resurrection body like Jesus' resurrection body, and for heaven and earth to unite, and for, you know, for those two to come together. I mean, that's the end of the book of Revelation, is the uniting of heaven and earth. And it's not going to be this disembodied floating around thing. And so that's where you can get into, like, it's almost not Christianity anymore when we start thinking about, well, the immaterial part of me is the most important part of me, and that's the part of me that's just going to go to heaven when I die. So this body doesn't matter. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I
I'm
think so.
talking again. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
You don't have to
I really
apologize.
like
You're
I got
answering
very
good
intrigued
questions.
by that.
Did you have anything, Christina, else that you wanted to add to? Did you pick up anything different than what's already been said?
So I feel like it was kind of similar. I did notice, like, I don't know, I almost got a little overwhelmed when I started looking, and it was like, I felt like it was being translated a lot of different ways,
It
like
is.
a creature and living being, and so it was like this has been, which makes me feel like maybe there just wasn't a good word, like kind of like you were saying, Nathan, there's not a good word to really describe what they're trying to get at. And so I feel like it has just been changed. And so, yeah, I started there. I hadn't watched the video, and I just was looking at all the different ways, and I was like, this is a little crazy. Like, it's kind of all over the place. So then when I went back and watched the video, I felt like that kind of cleared some of that up for me, because I was like, wow, I don't feel like there was a clear consensus of, like, a lot of our words have been very, like, there's, 2 or 3 ways that they kind of land, and soul was like all over the place, I felt like.
Yep.
Yeah.
100% agree with you. Yeah. Yeah. Again, you guys are giving great observations and feedback on everything. Nephesh was used 753 times in the Old Testament alone. And as you said, there's just so many ways it was used. So it's if you don't know what you're looking for, and like Nathan said, I agree 100%. I really wish they would change the meaning or make it more literal in the scriptures and how it's reflected. But I think so in the sense of the wholeness of us is it's such a big word. Like it almost needs its own word. Like it just needs, I don't know what that word is. I don't even know if we have a word this side of heaven that we can really use to describe it. And I think Nathan said essence, and I think that probably sums up pretty well. I mean, it's like everything. It's all of me. It's every piece of me. It's how I treat my physical, my emotions, my thoughts, my everything, all combined into one being, that is ultimately a creation from God. I'm made in God's image. And so therefore should be a reflection of that with my whole self. Anyway, yeah, it is a very, very deep word. And this one and heart, mind, were the 2 words for me that really, like, a light switch went off, and I'm like, holy cow, what I can't, why am I the only one who didn't know this? Is this something but growing up, much like Beth was saying, growing up, and much of us even here, we hear it, we sing these words, and because it is so well known that it's hard to shift people away from that idea, and it doesn't necessarily change the salvation of it. But I think it is such an important thing that we understand it. We understand that there are times where, it does mean, what was it? Ahava? No, not Ahava. What was it? Lebab or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can mean heart. It talks about the heart and, someone having a heart attack or whatever. And it does mean mind. So it is used in both contexts. But I think in some of the scriptures, it makes way more sense if we use it in the sense of mind, because then we're not necessarily, we're not let off the hook with like, oh, it's just a feeling. I have to feel my way through this. It's actually something I have to give thought to. I have to be intentional with what goes into my mind. I have to be intentional about the decision that I'm making, and how I'm making that decision. And it gives you a little bit more sense, in my mind, it gives me a sense of ownership more than just like, well, it's up to my heart. You don't follow your heart. Well, okay, what does that mean? Make a decision to not go follow your emotion would probably be a better way to put that. So anyway, not to ramble on or to correct anybody else, because again, that's not, I think, our goal here. But the idea is just, gosh, there's so much more meaning that we haven't yet explored or haven't been made aware of, unfortunately, in mainstream religion. It hasn't been a widespread thing, at least not in any denominations that I came from. So this was all fairly new to me, as of a few years ago, and just really has excited me to keep exploring and seeing what other words I mistranslated or misunderstood, or maybe just understood just the very tip of it and didn't really even get into the depth of what it actually could mean for my life and how I should live. So,
What I thought about when I was going through the heart study, there's a book that I loved in college called Wild at Heart.
Yep, read it.
Okay, yeah. And so one of the kind of key passages for that book is guard your heart because it is the wellspring of life. It's that proverb. And I'm just thinking, like, I got the book off my shelf this last week, and I was just sort of thumbing through it to see if anywhere in there he defined what he meant by heart. And I couldn't find it. I mean, it seemed like he was saying something like passion, but you could tell there's the sense of like feeling. That's what he was getting at, right? You got to live from your feelings. And that's not exactly what he was saying, but he definitely wasn't using it in the in the ancient Israelite sense of use your brain, so it's just interesting. Like I think we have to be so careful with these words, because if we're using them in a way that they were not, then we can end up like way over here, someplace that they never intended us to go. They never meant that. I've just read a lot of books that take one verse and and read it out of context, and then build a whole book or idea around that one thing. So I don't know. That's why I love these word studies, because I feel like if you just look at a word over and over again in the Bible, and you're like, okay, what does it mean here? What does it mean here? And you start to build out this picture, and you actually start to, I feel like with these two words especially, we're like really getting in the heads of ancient Israelites, like now you kind of understand their concept of a human, like a human is a person who everything happens right here, right? Like this is obviously like you stab someone here and they die, right? So I guess, I don't know. I mean, you stab someone here and they die too. So I don't know why they didn't make that connection. Like, what is this thing that's inside the skull? Who knows? But I mean, in their minds,
is that how we got the noodle phrase?
yeah, I mean, they thought it was food. I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, they thought everything was happening right here, like all of your thoughts, all of your, that stuff. It's just interesting, and then to read the idea of soul, and to just even realize that it seemed like a lot of ancient Israelites didn't even really have a concept of anything other than their wholeness. Like, I don't think they would have said that there's a piece of me that's going to float off when I die, so it's really interesting to get in their heads. And dang it, I'm rambling again. I'm sorry. I'm so excited about these
It's
words.
like, okay, can you imagine what people like 3,000 years from now are going to think about us?
Yeah.
So, oh, they were so close.
Yeah. But even if they're not right, anatomically, they were not correct, right?
Right.
I mean, this is the mind, not this. But just even knowing that's the way that they were thinking, it helps me to understand what they wrote so much better,
Yeah.
And then once we know what they were meaning by what they wrote, we can apply it better, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know, Nathan, you had some stuff, some things you wanted to share too. So don't be afraid to share them. I mean, I think all of us are interested in hearing, what your takeaways were, your math equations and all the good stuff you bring to the table.
I didn't do any math equations.
Where's your
any
percentages?
Oh, I thought you guys were getting tired of math. So, no, actually, I tried to, but Deuteronomy. Okay, I did do one math thing, and I'll just say this is a rabbit hole you should not go down. It was a complete waste of time. But that does happen sometimes. I noticed that there was the word leb and the word lebab, or lev and levav, two different words. And I was like, I wonder if there's any difference, because it literally looked like the exact same definition when I was looking at the two words. So I looked into it a little bit more, and the first thought that popped into my head was like, okay, was one like a more ancient word, and one was like a newer word. So then I fell down this crazy rabbit hole of like early biblical Hebrew versus late biblical Hebrew, and they even have terms for them like EBH versus LBH. And there were people for a long time who were trying to figure out which books are early, which books are late, based on the terminology that they were using. And it turned out to be such a muddle, no one could figure anything out. And I think it's because, like we talked about in intro to the Hebrew Bible class that we did last spring, remember the aspen analogy, right? Like these things all grew up together, right? So if they're growing up together, if you're taking some ancient things and maybe another scribe or someone who's a disciple of Isaiah is putting something else in there, right? It makes sense that it might have all the words in it, right? So anyway, that was interesting. Just to see that there was nothing there. So don't go down that rabbit hole.
Before you get off of that though, when I went to the Septuagint thing on heart, which was cardia.
Yeah.
I don't know if I got this right, but I think it said I think the Blue Letter Bible said there were 748 occurrences of that word in the Septuagint, which was a lot more than I get it.
Yeah, you're right. It was a lot less than that I didn't add up Lev and Levav to see how much it was total.
Right. So I just looked up a few of them to try to find out, well, what other word were they? So they were in the Septuagint, they were using cardia for both Leb and Lebab, or however you say that.
Right.
And
I would assume so.
okay. Yeah, I didn't look up a lot of them because it takes a lot of time, but I was just trying to figure out, why are there so many more? Why is cardia occurring so many more times than Lebab or whatever, however you say that?
I will say one thing that I did find interesting, and again, there may be nothing there, I mean, it could be that these words are just synonyms, and sometimes we prefer one word at certain days and we prefer a different word on other days. But Deuteronomy does use Levav almost exclusively. I think there's only like 3 or 4 times that it uses Lev or Leb. The rest of the Torah uses Leb way more than it uses Levav, which is just kind of interesting, and I don't know what that shows, but it's it could show, I mean, we know at least the end of Deuteronomy was written by somebody else. We know that at least, right? Because it talks about the death of Moses. It talks about where they buried him, and no one knows to this day where he's buried. That sounds like there's been some time, right? So it's just interesting to think about that, aspect of it. Maybe was this sermon of Moses recorded by someone else? I don't know. So anyway, that's that was one rabbit hole. Did anyone so I think the question that I asked last time was if you could figure out why the word mind got added to the New Testament statement of the Shema.
I wondered if it had to do with like if they started to figure out that like this is separate from, but I don't know. That was like my own thought.
Yeah.
But I didn't figure out much.
Yeah, that's what I thought too, since they didn't have a word to begin with, and they realized that that's not just the heart. Don't think with your heart.
Yeah.
I actually heard a sermon right after you asked that question on TV about that. And I don't think it answered the question, but he was talking about that he was saying that the word strength, which we're going to do that next week, right? He was talking about what that word meant. Yeah, I guess it really wasn't any kind of explanation. He was saying that Jesus said it in Matthew and Mark whenever they were testing him.
Mhm.
He added the word mind. And then in Luke, the lawyer or the guy that asks him, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And so Jesus says, what does the law say? So Jesus asks him, and then he says the same thing that Jesus had said. He added mind also. So that Bible teacher was saying that he thought Jesus was a respected rabbi and that this guy had been listening to Jesus's teaching, and he was repeating back what he had heard Jesus say. But he didn't really explain, other than talking about that strength meant something different than mind, and that Jesus had put mind in there. But one of the places Jesus says mind and strength. So anyway, tell us the answer to that question.
I don't know the answer. I have a theory. So
Let's hear it.
so here's my theory. First off, Jesus didn't say any of those things. just so that we remember, because he was probably speaking in Aramaic, most likely, right? So who knows exactly how he phrased it, but the gospel writers, when they're recording what Jesus said, they're talking to a Jewish and Gentile, Jewish and Greek audience, right? So I did a little bit of research, and Christina, I think you're on the right path, because what I found was, let me find my note on this. Okay, so Aristotle thought that the center of the body, where the thoughts, the emotions, the will, all of that, he thought that it was the heart, just like ancient Jews would have thought, right? Ancient Israelites would have thought. But there was this movement of Hellenistic physicians a little bit after Aristotle. So Aristotle, I think, was in the 300s BC. So maybe in like the 200s or 100s BC, there was this movement of Greek thought that these physicians started to realize through some of their studies, hey, this actually, like up here, that's where the thoughts happen. And so there was that movement towards that understanding. And so if you are a person so you're a Jewish person, right? And maybe you heard Jesus say the Shema, maybe like word for word, the way it is in the Hebrew Bible. Maybe he said it in Hebrew. Maybe he said it in Aramaic, whatever that would have sounded like. It's possible he said it in Greek, but I doubt it, knowing the people that he was talking to. I mean, he was mostly speaking to Israelites in Israel. I think they were trying to make sure that the idea got communicated correctly. That's what I think. Because if you left out mind, if you said heart to a Greek person who followed the Hellenistic physicians' idea that the mind is up here, you're not getting part of what they meant in the Shema. Because in the Shema, when they say love the Lord your God with all your heart, they mean with your thoughts, with your will. And these people who are hearing this and are thinking, this is where the thoughts, this is where the will comes from. I think the gospel writers wanted to make sure that they were accurately communicating in Greek what Jesus meant and what the Shema meant. That's my personal take on that. And if that's the case, that's really cool, because what you're seeing there is they're using the language, they're adapting the language to make sure that they are communicating the same ideas to this new culture that they're, it's just like a cross-cultural thing in action that you're seeing right there, which I think is so neat. Again, that's my
Makes
take.
a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So
It's definitely very fascinating to get to see that kind of an action and I think I agree. I think that probably is what was or that's the only thing I can come up with as to why they would take this very important, scripture that they recite and just all of a sudden be like, yeah, we're going to add this to it. So, I feel like, why would you change something that is so almost sacred to say, other than to do, other than, oh, I've gained this understanding of where this is actually happening, and they're trying to communicate that. So that is really cool and interesting to see them kind of do that. It is making me think a little bit with the word heart. I feel like we still in our own culture misuse that word, because I mean, we'll say things all the time like, oh, follow your heart, or what is your heart telling you to do? Or my heart's not telling me to do anything, it's just pumping blood. Like it's not saying
Yep.
anything. But like we automatically, when you say that to someone in our culture, they know what you're meaning. Like, what are you feeling? What's your, what are your emotions behind this? So it's interesting that we still are like using that word in a weird way. You know what I mean? It's just interesting to think about that, or, it's just what it's become, I guess. But
Yeah, you're right. For us, it's become, what do you feel?
yeah.
And you think about, I mean, that's important to understand, because so I actually wrote down all of these different heart expressions that I thought were kind of cool, just in Deuteronomy.
Bless your heart.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that one was in there, but it should have been. So made our hearts melt, made his heart obstinate, lay it to your heart. These words shall be on your heart, say in your heart, don't let your heart be lifted up. I will circumcise your heart. Don't harden your heart. His heart is hot. that one was interesting. Let not your heart faint. I think that might have been King James. Confusion of heart, cheerful heart, the terror of your heart, take these words to heart. But without the understanding that we now have about what heart actually means, you may misinterpret a lot of those phrases. I mean, if you're thinking that means what I'm feeling. So for example, the circumcise your heart, I thought a little bit more about that one. Like when God says that he's going to circumcise the hearts of these Israelites, what is he saying there? Because I've always read that, I think, as you're like a callous, unfeeling people, and I'm going to soften your heart so you can feel again. And I think that's not what he was trying to communicate by saying, I will circumcise your heart. Now, knowing what heart means, so I mean, it's just things like that we read them and we assume we know what they mean. And a lot of times, if we're not careful, we don't know what they mean.
So when they say circumcise the heart, do you feel like they meant like to cut out like worldly thought?
I think so. The definition of heart, it has to do with your thoughts, your will, your affections, your purposes. So again, this is like the decision-making center of your body, right? That's what the heart is, the way that they saw it. This is the thing that decides what to do. So to circumcise your heart, I think it's usually contrasted with the Israelites' complete disobedience to God's law, right? So if he circumcises their heart, he is now essentially turning their heart, their will, their decision-making apparatus, so that it's going to make the right decisions, so that it's going to have the right worldview, not worshiping idols, doing the Torah, doing justice for those who need it, those sorts of things. I really think that's the idea that's being got. I mean, if you look at the context of the passage, it's in this whole section where God says, guys, I know you're going to break all of this. You're going to mess all of this up. Like, but don't worry, you're going to go into exile, but then I'm going to circumcise your heart. And then, and then you're going to be able to follow my law, because your decision-making center is going to be fixed. I'm going to fix this for you so that you want the right things, so that you can do the right things. So I don't know. I think it's just, when you understand what heart means, it just adds another layer to it. And I'm not saying that feeling's not involved there, because I think it is, but that's one aspect of what heart means.
That makes sense.
So I thought that was cool. The rabbit hole I fell down with Nephesh, I don't know how to pronounce it. just really kind of messed me up. And I'm not sure that I've figured this out completely, but I wrote like a lot of paragraphs on Deuteronomy 12:23. Here, I'll read it. Because I was going through this and I'm like, okay, yeah, I got it. And then do you ever get to one of those verses where you're just like, oh, I don't have it anymore? So he says, he's talking about eating clean versus unclean animals. Make sure you only eat the clean ones. But then he says in verse 23, only be sure that you do not eat the blood, for the blood is the life, and you shall not eat the life, the nephesh, with the flesh. And so then I'm like, what the heck? Because that is clearly now making a distinction. Nephesh does not mean body in that case, because it's being contrasted with the body in that case. And I'm like, what is going on? Because I thought totally thought I understood what was happening. And so that led me down a huge rabbit hole. And then I started looking up all the places that flesh got used. And then I was like, does this have anything to do with what Paul talks about when he talks about the spirit versus the flesh? Probably not. But yeah, that was a big rabbit hole also. But I think that rabbit hole ended up leading me to the idea that nephesh really is connected to life. And I think I would even maybe, Joseph, I know you said the essence of a person, and I think I said that too. I like the essence of a person, except again, in our Western culture, when you say the essence of a person, I feel like they could hear that and they could say, oh yeah, the essence and the real me, not this body, the real me, I'm like, oh, no. The body is the real you, along with everything else that's animating your body, giving it life right now. And so I think what's happening in that verse, where it says, don't eat the life with the flesh, don't eat the nephesh with the flesh. The idea of nephesh is not just that you're this thing that walks around, this physical thing. You're like a living thing. And that goes back to, if you look at the first time I think nephesh is used, I think, could be wrong about this, but I think it's in Genesis 2. When it says that, God gathers up the dust or whatever, and then he breathes into Adam, and Adam becomes a living nephesh. And so it's just like this really cool idea that like God's breath enters into this person. Okay, now he's alive. Before it was just this flesh, but now it's like this living being, this nephesh. And so the connection with life is really, really strong. It doesn't work every time, because nephesh, I think, also can mean just like, I think sometimes it was kind of like our expression, whatever your heart desires, like whatever your nephesh desires. They said that several times in Deuteronomy. But I think really when it's talking about a living thing, the idea of life is really, really, really important for the word nephesh. Which I think is cool.
Actually, the first time it was used was Genesis 1:20. That's the first time it was used.
Thank you for teaching me, so I don't just make stuff up randomly.
No, yeah. So I think this is interesting. I'll just read to you what I have here in my in this Bible that I have, that I was telling you about. So I'll give you the whole.
Did you get a bigger one?
Yeah, exactly. So of course the definition, it just says, a breathing creature, i.e. an animal or abstract vitality, used very widely, a literal, accommodated or figurative sense, bodily or mental, any appetite, beast, body, breath, creature, dead or deadly, desire, contented, fish, ghost, greedy, heart, Yeah, so it kind of goes through a bunch of different things, but then this part here, it says a feminine noun meaning breath, the inner being with its thoughts and emotions. It is used 753 times in the Old Testament. It has a broad range of meanings. Most of its use fall into these categories, and then breath literally, and some of the things we've talked about. But the final thing it says, the scripture view a person as a composite whole, fully relating to God and not divided in any way. And it also says like an animating force. So thought that was interesting as well. Anyway, yeah, there's a lot there, but those are just a couple little highlights from that, from what they
Yeah.
wrote down. But
I loved the first two were like a breathing creature and then vitality. I mean, because vitality has to do with life, but I love that they said a breathing creature rather than just a creature.
yeah,
The other thing that I saw when you look at the Greek in the Septuagint, did you guys see what the word replacement was
I did not.
for nephesh? I mean, why not? There were only 754 words you had to go through. Just joking.
Mhm.
Yeah, this was another big one. I should have warned you guys about that, but I didn't realize it actually until I started going through it myself, that we were back to the ones that was closer to 1,000 than it was to 100. But the word is, I forgot it. I wrote it down. Psyche, there it is. Psyche. Yeah, psyche or Suki, depending on like which website you were looking at. But I did see something that said that the two related words in Greek were Zoe and Numa were the two related words. And so Zoe is kind of more like, as I understand it, just like your physical makeup, physical being. And then Numa is spirit. I mean, that's the word that's used for the spirit all over the New Testament. Whether it be God's spirit or our own spirit, meaning the immaterial part of us. But then psyche is kind of like this, in Greek, it seems like it's like this in-between word, right? Which again, I think is perfect. If you're a person who's deciding, how do I change this Hebrew word into Greek? Well, Zoe doesn't quite fit because that's just the body, and Numa doesn't really fit because that's the spirit, that's the immaterial part. But we've got this word that kind of like splits the difference between the two. Okay, that's the best Greek word probably to use to replace nephesh. And I just think that's cool because it almost illuminates what they were thinking when they used this word. It's like this, yeah, it's both of these things together. It's Zoe and Numa, right? That's what we are. We are this one thing. And there's just so many implications to that, I mean, this is why Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians, why it's important to honor God with our bodies, because, a Greek thinking person might have had the temptation to think, well, if my immaterial part is saved, then it doesn't matter what I do in my body. And Paul is saying, no, you don't understand. That's not the right way to think about this. All of you needs to love the Lord your God, not just whatever part of you that you're thinking about right now. So I don't know. I just think it's cool.
Yep. It's very cool.
That answered my next question, because in my head I'm trying to like go through that verse, the Shema, and think about, okay, when I'm honoring the Lord, I'm like supposed to honor him with my heart, which really means my brain. And then I'm supposed to honor him with my soul, which really means, and I was like, which really means what? But that makes sense. Like with your body, with what your physical, I almost feel like with your physical actions, like the work of your hands, with the choices you make with your body.
I think
does that seem
next
right?
week, Christina, I think next week's word will summarize, it will close and fill in some of the gaps that you guys are talking about this week.
Yeah.
When we study Me'od, that's gonna, I think some of what you're asking right now will be summed up this next week
Yeah, agreed.
with the last word.
Okay, that's good. Because
Yeah.
yeah, now I'm like trying to piece it all together with like a translated,
Yeah.
and now I'm like, now the verse is kind of confusing. I feel like I understood it better before when it was like, oh, let me just like put my cultural spin on what I think these things mean. Now I'm like, wait, what does it mean? So
Well,
yeah,
I
so
think,
maybe-
Christina, so next week, and Nathan and I haven't talked about this, so I'm just spitballing here, but I think next week, once we've talked through it, I think we could reread it together and try to just kind of read it and put it all into the right context, or at least the best we can with our limited ability to explain things, but try to put it into a context that maybe is a little bit more in line with what those are, the Jewish people were thinking back in the day, and then see how it plays out. Just see what happens with it. Because again, I've looked at this verse. I've done the Shema study 4 or 5 times, and every time I still feel like there's just more. Like there's just so much to it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's the exciting part about like making you want to keep looking at scripture and keep trying to understand it better, is when we can't fully understand everything, because there's just so much depth to that. And again, the other part I keep thinking about with Nathan, as everyone's talking here, and we are, as limited creatures, we're trying to summarize a concept or an idea that our brains probably cannot fully fathom, what is actually being said, the depth of what's being said. And so someday when we're fully remade, or our bodies are new, and I can't even imagine, but I'm excited to see like what my mind, however that works, how I conceptualize some of these spiritual truths, and I go, oh wow, man, I missed the mark on that one, or that's just so much bigger than I ever could have fathomed with my human brain. So I think, again, that I'm just speaking to me. I mean, like, this excites me. This gets me excited about how awesome and big and powerful and creative God is, and the people he created, and their minds and their talents and abilities that they use to put together the scripture. So anyway, that was a ramble as well. So
It's a very good ramble. No, I think I love that idea also, Joseph, of just, I think next week maybe we just we make our own little translation of the Shema, and see if we, in modern English, maybe we can make it say a little bit closer to what it said to those Hebrew people that were hearing it. I think that would be cool.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be right, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll just be righter, right?
yeah.
Right there.
Does anybody have anything else they want to add, or anything before we let you guys go on to your evening?
Just when you were describing that, Joe, it's like we're looking at a picture. If you look at a picture of something, and you can see all the stuff there, but when you go to that place and actually see it for your own eyes, how much bigger it is. It's like, when we went to the Niagara Falls, you can see pictures of Niagara Falls,
Yes.
and it's like, wow, that looks, it's awesome or whatever. But when you actually go there and experience it for yourself, then it's like so much bigger than just, the picture just doesn't do it justice. And I think that's kind of like what we're doing here is, we're trying to figure it out, but even what we're going to come up with doesn't do it justice of what it is.
Mhm.
Thank you for saying that. That, I think that is said way better than I could have said it. But that is exactly right when you think that way. I feel exactly the same way. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Nathan, anything else before we close out?
No, yeah, thank you guys. I don't know. I like these word studies, and I'm really enjoying hearing everything that you're pulling out of these. It's just really cool.
I enjoy your rabbit holes.
Even when they're completely pointless.
You're saving us time there, Nathan. You're saving us time.
I could save you more time if I just didn't tell you about the rabbit holes that were a waste of time.
Yeah, would you just tell us what the rabbit hole for next week is so we don't go down that one?
I don't know that one.
Nope.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So this next week is our last word of the Shema. And so we'll wrap that up this next week. And then, Nathan and I obviously will have some conversation and kind of figure out when we'll start. I'm assuming, and again, I don't want to put any ideas at Nathan. I haven't ran past Nathan, but I assume that we'll probably give it a little bit of time, give you guys a little break like we did this last time. And then we're going to probably approach the group again because you guys have been like in it this whole time. But there may be some people that their schedules have changed. I've talked to a couple people and their schedules are just changing. So we want to probably give an opportunity for people to say, hey, I still want to stay in or I don't want to stay in as we decide, where to go from here. Because I think next we'd like to go into the Heaven and Earth series through the Bible Project. And again, we haven't talked about what that's going to look like or how quickly we'll do that, but we'll try to be cognizant of, everyone's schedule as well on that. So anyway.
Sounds good. Thank you guys for
Thank you.
hosting.
You guys have a great rest of your week and we'll see you guys next week.
All right, good night.
Right.
Good.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye.